Hi and welcome to this session on the approaches paper 2 for AQA. Have a look at this and try to see if you can spot the mistake. On a first glance at this, we don't usually spot the mistake. Why? Why can we not see at times that there are two the's in this? This is one of the things that we're going to be considering when looking at the cognitive approach. Again, here is another example. So why can we not do this? This is because of the way that we process information in our brain, and this is completely linked to the cognitive approach. These are all examples of cognitive errors. You could be asked a question similar to this in the exam to explain the role of schema in these word illusions. And what happens is that we actually assume something to say what it says when it doesn't actually say what it says. And it's because we are used to seeing things and we miss things out. We fill gaps all the time, and again, this is one of the features of the cognitive approach. This is just as an introduction or a starter to what we're looking at in today's session. So, schemas allow us to process a lot of information quickly, and this is useful as a sort of mental shortcut that prevents us from being overwhelmed by environmental stimuli. However, schema distorts our perception, leading to perceptual errors. Today's session, though, is a refresher for all students to have a look at the cognitive approach, but in particular to focus on the emergence of cognitive neuroscience, a topic that you may have forgotten about or one that you may not feel very confident about. So we're going to recap on this just to ensure that people have a little bit of confidence in this area. So first of all, what is cognitive neuroscience? So this is the scientific study of the influence of brain structures on mental processes. In order to access full marks on answering a question about cognitive neuroscience, you must not just focus on the brain structures, that would be the biological approach. You must explain that it's how brain structures influence mental processes. So, from going back to our biopsychology for second years, we now know about research by Dr. Paul Broca, because he identified Broca's area, which is one of the localized areas of the brain that you need for paper 2. He carried out a case study to identify how damage to part of the frontal lobe could permanently damage speech production. And this is arguably the start of cognitive neuroscience, the link between the structure of the frontal lobe and speech production, i.e. mental processes. And this is where cognitive neuroscience started. The research behind this comes from Broca, looking at a patient called Tan. Again, second years, you should be familiar with this research because we have looked at this in September and October of this year. The patient was named Tan because that was the only word he was able to produce. You can see up here, this is Broca's area, the black section. And Broca studied him for many years to try and uncover the cause of his speech difficulties. And speech difficulties are cognitive. When we look at cognitive psychology, we're interested in perception, attention, language, cognitions. So this is clearly an area of cognitive psychology. But remember, we're not looking at the biology behind this now. We are now looking at how the biology links to cognitive processing. So when Tan died, Broca studied his brain in a post-mortem and found that there was a particular area that was damaged. This area was then named Broca's area, and from this he was able to establish that the damaged area was responsible for speech production, therefore linking a biological physical area with mental processing. Again, the emergence of cognitive neuroscience. So looking at further developments, in the past 20 years, scientists have been able to observe and describe the neurological basis of mental processes. And this has been possible because of certain brain imaging techniques, such as the fMRI scan and PET scans. In second year psychology, you have looked at brain scans. We've not covered too much on PET scans, but you should know that these are ways of being able to look at certain areas in the brain and see which areas in the brain are active. And you can see here from these scans, certain areas of the brain are active on hearing words, seeing words, speaking words, and thinking about words. Again, from this, we can clearly see a link between the biological process, the area, the actual anatomical part of the brain, and the mental processing. So here we have two examples of scans. On the left here we have an MRI scan, and on the right we have a PET scan. The PET scan is probably the one that we more commonly see in psychology because it highlights in the bright colours, and this we often use to look for neurotransmitters. So brain scans. You just need to be aware that brain scans are able to identify the function of certain areas in the brain. In cognitive neuroscience, brain scans are vital to infer where the processes are actually taking place. And now it's become the dominant paradigm in psychology that in order to find out where speech production happens or why we can visualize certain things in certain ways, we need to use a brain scan to see which area of the brain is active. This is just a brief start to cognitive neuroscience. You need to ensure that you can explain what is meant by cognitive neuroscience, explain where it emerged from, i.e. Broca, explain two strengths of the approach and two weaknesses. Strengths of the approach would include the fact that it's scientific, the fact that it's rooted in biology, and it links biology and cognitive science. Weaknesses of the approach are that it fails to consider the role of learning. It fails to consider childhood experience. It also only looks in a physical way at the brain. It's only identifying certain areas and ignoring other parts of the brain that may be important, and the fact that there are vast individual differences with this. It also is quite reductionist, as in it is reducing mental processing down to one physical area of the brain. Make sure that you are able to explain two strengths and two weaknesses of this approach.